Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Keep the Line Moving, the podcast designed to talk about leadership, life, and inspiration. I am your host, Chris Gargano. And for episode 38, our topic is the comfort zone and a leader's relationship to learning and developing either in the comfort zone or not. We explore this topic in detail with Dr. Bob Turner, our guest here in episode 38. He wrote a book called Zone Leader, right here, 7 Tactics for Leading in the Zones. Let me dive in for just a second to read this sentence to give you what this conversation will focus on. The comfort zone may feel safe, but in reality, it is a dangerous zone for a leader. It stifles innovation and growth, causing leaders to abandon the best versions of themselves in a world where quality leadership is desperately needed. Let's begin right now. This week with Dr. Bob Turner. All right, Bob, let's rock and roll. I'm so appreciative for you being on the podcast. I can't wait to dive into this material. Bob, tell everyone here about your leadership journey, if you could.
Well, I never really thought much about leadership. Most of my life growing up, I got married right after turning right at about 21, and we had children right away. And then I decided to go to school. And during that time, I took a class on leadership, and that class probably changed my life as much as anything. The instructor was awesome, and he was a retired military gentleman, and he just really brought the class to life. And so I started doing more study in leadership. I started reading some more books and started thinking about how can I teach this material, but I just never really had an opportunity for a number of years. And then I went back to teach. And while I was teaching at a particular school in Colorado, they came in one day and they said, look, we need somebody to teach a course. We're not sure what course we need. And I said, well, if you want my opinion, we need a course on leadership. And they said, okay, you've got it. And so from there, I thought, okay, now I've got to study leadership because I'm going to have to teach about leadership. And it really has. It's changed my entire life.
We have mutual experiences there. Let's look at this because it did the same for me when I went back to grad school. When you walked into that class and the professor started talking about the concept of leadership, the art and science of leadership, what was it that spoke to you?
Well, first, I knew that I needed to make some changes as a leader in my home, which I think that's where it really begins, is being a leader in our home first. You know, being a father of 3 children and a husband to my wife, I knew that I needed to be a leader there and to improve in my leadership there. And then I initially started in ministry. And so I was in ministry, continued to do some work in ministry. And so I knew that there needed to be an area of leadership that I applied there for the people who were listening to me and following me. And so I really focused in on how can I improve how I am reaching others and influencing others. And then, of course, John Maxwell came on the scene, and from the material he was writing, I was just absorbing as much as I possibly could from that material. And then a whole new world opened up to me after I became an adult and had grandchildren. And I thought, there's much here I need to learn. And it's funny, the more I study leadership, the more I feel like I don't know, and I need to learn about leadership and how to influence others.
And that's a great point. It's a continuous learning journey on leadership. And I said this, I'll say this, I'm starting to really enjoy this podcast and engaging with great guests and the people that are listening and getting useful information. And then, so I was a guest recently on a podcast, Bob, and a similar experience took place. And I came out and said, I'm taking a stand here. Any leader that says that they've got it, I got it, I'm good. Whoa, you got to take a step back on that, to your exact point. As you start to dive into more of the psychology and the art and science of leadership and the how do you deal with adversity, how do you deal with success and all the nuances of leadership, you realize we have so much to learn.
Well, and when I turned 50 is when I actually went back to work on some graduate studies and worked on my doctorate. And that's where my world really opened up. And I studied at the master's level on global leadership. And then I went into a doctorate that involved intercultural studies, and the emphasis there was adult leadership development. And the courses that I took during that time and the material that I was reading during that time, I was just blown away with how much there was to learn about leadership from every possible angle. And I just couldn't learn enough. I continued to read, and even to this day, I continue to learn more and more about how to improve the way that I work with others and how to lead others, and how I can help others become better leaders and reach their potential as a leader in their organizations. And so it's a fruitful thing, but it's a fun thing for me, is to have that ability to see others blossom into the leaders that they can be.
I love that. And it's so true. When you see somebody just flourishing in their role and getting it and understanding how their individual strengths are helping others grow, and then all of a sudden the team
Yeah.
grows, and then the department grows, and then the organization grows. You're absolutely right. It is fantastic. So, Bob, you're a consultant, you're a speaker, you're an author. We're going to get to your fabulous new book that was recently released in just a second. But I have to ask you the question. When you mentioned John Maxwell and some leadership gurus and such, he's more than a guru, for goodness
Yeah.
sakes. But let's look at this. What do you do when someone is resistant to wanting to learn more about leadership? In other words, like what I alluded to earlier, what do you do? How do you handle it when you're getting resistance? Because we're going to get to your book. Sometimes, more often than not, that takes place.
Sure. In fact, mentioning John Maxwell, there was a statement I read that I don't remember which book it was in specifically, but he made the statement that every individual influences at least 4 people every single day. And as I thought about that statement, when people are resistant to learning about leadership and why they need to grow their leadership ability, that's one of the things I point out to them. You're going to influence at least 4 people every day. That fact alone should motivate all of us to want to improve in our ability to lead others, what we know about leadership, and how we can be the greatest influence we're going to be. And then I often share with them, you're going to influence people one way or another. The choice is up to you to decide what kind of influence you want to be in their lives, whether that's a positive influence or a negative influence. But it really comes down to the choice that everyone has to make as to what kind of influence do you want to be. And if you want to be the best possible influence in the lives of others, the key is learning how to be a better leader. And so that's what it's all about.
Here's the book, everybody. It's called The Zone Leader: 7 Tactics for Leading in the Zones. So, Bob, this book just came out early February. Congratulations. It's your second
Thank
book.
you.
In getting to know you in preparation for this podcast, I've enjoyed getting to know you. So, in reading the book, it has backed up the man and the person that you are, and I've really enjoyed it. Describe your thesis for this book and why it was important to write it on this topic.
The thesis of the book is really about helping people reach their potential in leadership. And in order to reach that potential, they've got to move from where they are to where they need to be. And so most people, as I've mentioned, are in a comfort zone. Sometimes organizations get in a comfort zone. They just continue to do the same things in the same ways. And anytime they get out of that comfort zone, it's usually because there has been some kind of change that has been implemented. And when change is implemented, there will always be, as we talked about earlier, some form of resistance. And it usually leads to a form of conflict.
Why did you write this book? What was speaking to you? What were you observing? What were you researching that said, okay, 18 months ago or 2 years ago when you started the process, you said this has to be the topic and it has to happen now?
Well, the pandemic really created probably the biggest foundation for understanding the direction of this, because the pandemic really pushed us as a world, especially as a nation and individually. It pushed us out of our comfort zones. It kind of forced us out of our comfort zones because we were forced to make changes that we never thought we would have to make. The educational system in this country faced those kinds of changes. Political arena faced these changes. Corporations were having to rethink, how do we deal with operating more remotely and people working from home, and even the way that we religiously in this country approach the aspect of assembling to worship God. It all changed, and things that we never thought we would do or be interested in doing, we were now forced to do.
All right, Bob. So we talked before coming on today about folks wanting to use this tool to better understand how people go through change and navigating change. Because whether you're walking into a dugout, a locker room, a
Right.
boardroom, or what have you, there's a group of people looking at you as the leader, and you're about to say something you know is going to cause a reaction. Whatever the case may be, that information is going to cause a reaction. In a practical sense, how could somebody benefit by understanding the premise of your book, pushing through the comfort zone into the other zones to make sure that everyone is together and, as you said earlier, on the boat together and moving in a direction that works for the
Right.
organization slash team?
The idea is to rethink how we communicate, how we operate, how we negotiate. And the primary area there is this concept of communication. And I approach communication from two different perspectives. There is effective communication, which deals with the means by which we communicate: email, texting, face to face, whatever it is. The other is communicating effectively. And communicating effectively is about understanding, because we can speak the same language, but if what I'm saying to you is not understood, then we really haven't communicated, at least not effectively. And so, one of the things that I asked all of these military leaders was, how do you communicate the mission? And how do you know what you've communicated concerning that mission is understood? And without exception, all of them responded almost in the same way. They used different means to communicate, but ultimately it came down to face-to-face communication, and ultimately having that person that they've communicated the mission to repeat back to them what had been communicated to them. That way they knew they understood what was communicated, or if there was information that needed to be corrected. In light of the example you talked about, going into a boardroom or going into a situation to where you know that what you're about to say is going to create some change, it's going to create some resistance, it's going to be possibly not accepted well. The way that I would approach minimizing that is to first have conversations one-on-one with the people who are going to be sitting in that boardroom, and talk to them and get some feedback from them as to what areas that maybe you missed, or maybe that could add something to what you're wanting to do that's going to make it even better. It doesn't mean they won't be resistant, but it minimizes the amount of resistance when they know it's coming and they're prepared for it. And communication is the key. And so we've got to find ways to be more effective in our communication in order to minimize that resistance.
Why do people resist change, Bob? I understand in that situation that we just uncovered in the boardroom and having the conversations beforehand to make sure
Yeah.
that folks, to the extent you can, when it's not a pandemic or a a bad diagnosis of an illness and such, but for normal everyday business, if you can't get people to where you want them to go, why do they resist change? In a general sense, everyone is different. Everyone processes information
Right.
different. But in a general sense, why do people resist change?
This is probably one of my favorite things. I didn't list these in the book this way, but I have since developed them, because I think there are four areas that kind of create an umbrella to explain why people resist change. The first is what I call the Chicken Little complex. The sky is falling. As soon as you say we're going to implement this change, people assume the worst. And I'm not sure why that happens, that they don't think, oh, this change is going to really make things better. But they become resistant to it because their fear of it going to make things worse. They think it's only going to create chaos. And so as a result, that it's just the worst. It's just this Chicken Little, the sky is falling. The second reason is what I call the communication station breakdown. And as I heard a guy say, he said the difference is uh, people, it's what he calls a communication gap, the difference between fear and faith. And that gap in communication, when we do not communicate to people why we're making this change, when this change is going to take place, how we came to this decision, who's going to be involved in advancing all of this material. And when we don't communicate that, there's a gap between um, fear and faith. And when people don't have that information, the result is fear. When they have it, then it's faith. And they begin to trust in their leadership. And so that communication breakdown is a huge piece. The third is what I call the emotional roller coaster. And that is that people are emotionally connected to some way to either they're part of what has always been in place and what they're doing. And so when you change that emotionally, they're tied to it. And so they don't want to let go of that because that became a part of their identity. And emotionally, there's a connection there that they don't want to give that up. And then the fourth one is just that it's threatening to them. It's the fight or flight. And so they see the change as a threat. And so they're either going to get at war, they're going to fight you over it, or they're going to leave altogether. And so to me, those four reasons kind of become an umbrella as to why people are so resistant to change.
So it's basically on the leader to set the path, to
Mhm.
understand everybody who's part of the team, enacting the change and setting the path that makes sense for everybody. And those
Right.
are what you referred to earlier, those individual conversations that take place before the change is implemented. So this is a
Yeah.
process. And that's the thing, Bob, when we were talking about like you, when you were sparked with the concept, the art and science of leadership in that first class that you took, leadership takes time. Leadership takes a lot of understanding. Leadership is psychology, and that's what you said. You can't just walk into a room and say, "Okay, we're going this way. All right, everybody, let's go to lunch. Have a great day." It's so much
Yeah.
more complex than that, and you're uncovering it throughout this book.
One of the things that we had talked about before, and this is so critical for a leader, is trust. He's got to be worthy of people's trust. Years ago, I attended a Chamber of Commerce banquet, and the guest speaker that year was Houston Nutt. And that kind of gives you an idea of how long ago this was because he was the head football coach of the Arkansas Razorback football program. And so I had opportunity to be there. And as he got up and he began to speak, he talked about that every incoming freshman into the Razorback football program, they sat down with as a staff and they impressed upon them the incredible privilege that it is to be an Arkansas Razorback. And then he said, we asked them three questions. Well, I took out a pen and I started writing down some notes because I thought, well, this could be good. And he said, the first question we asked them is, can I trust you? Can I trust you to go to class? Can I trust you to do the work that the professors assign you? Can I trust you? The second question, he said, is, are you committed? Are you committed to being an Arkansas Razorback? Are you committed to giving 100% of your effort on the field, off the field? Are you committed? When he asked the third question, in my mind, I thought, I don't know what he said after that because in my mind, when that third question came up, I could not believe what I was hearing because he said, the third question is, do you care? And my first thought is if you take a group of people, small or large, that you can trust, who are committed and who care, you can change the world. I have a good friend. In fact, we have a mutual friend, Dr. Andrew Campbell. We were talking the other day, and he made this statement to me. He said, people will listen to your vision, but they follow your character. And a trustworthy character, that's the foundation. That's the foundation of all. If I can trust you, I will go wherever you need me to go, and I will do whatever you need me to do.
That was a great story, by the way, on Houston Nutt, and I love those principles. And there's a word that jumps out at me to me there, and it's the word care. So is it safe to say, based on that story from Houston Nutt, when he said you have to care, and then you said you stopped listening because trust and everything was starting to, permeate your mind. Can you say, based on your research in writing this book, that if a leader shows that they care, you can move through the 7 zones much easier. I'm oversimplifying that, but I could see that groups can get caught up if the leader does not have trust or care in their
Right.
arsenal as they navigate this exact meaning here, going through the 7 stages.
Yeah. Because if I care about you, then I'm going to do what's best for you. It's not about me. It's not about my agenda. This is really, am I making the decisions? Am I going to implement the changes that ultimately are going to be best for you as the person who is following me as a leader? And when that exists, then people will follow.
Okay, Bob, I want to read a part of the book here, and then I want you to
Okay.
comment on it. As the aforementioned survey conducted by the Barna Group reveals, a large percentage of 18 to 35-year-olds believe that the reason we have a leadership crisis is because older leaders do not allow younger leaders to actually lead. Why? One reason is because comfort and growth do not coexist.
Yeah,
Talk about that, Bob. The Barna Group. The young leaders of today don't think the older leaders get them. That's a
that's right.
disconnect, my friend. Explain.
Well, it's interesting. That research was done in 2019, and they surveyed a little over 15,000 18 to 35-year-olds. And 82% of that group said, we're facing a leadership crisis in this country. And there were a number of different reasons given. The one that really stood out to me as you read in that book was that their older leaders are not really allowing the younger leaders to actually lead. And I thought, what an indictment, because oftentimes I think what happens is older generations, older leaders, they see the upcoming generation more as young people that need to be fixed rather than, as I've heard it said, an asset to be leveraged. Instead, they think we just need to fix them. And I'm like, no, we need to leverage their abilities. Tim Elmore is one of my favorite authors. I enjoy reading Tim's material. His podcast and his material is just really good on working with this upcoming generation, the Gen Z group. And he talks a lot about this working to develop leaders in this next generation. And in some of the material that I've read from him, he's kind of coined this phrase generational quotient, GQ. You know, we understand the need for emotional intelligence, we understand the need for IQ or an intelligent quotient. But he talks about this generational quotient. In any organization, you're going to have 5 levels of people, 5 generations of people. And the challenge is true that the older generation does not get, nor do they understand the younger generation. And the younger generation does not get nor understand the older generation, because the backgrounds, the education, the culture that we all grow up in is so vastly different. And one of the things that we really need to do, if we're not going to prevent growth from taking place, if we're not going to stymie growth, is we're going to have to learn to get one another. We're going to have to learn how to work together, no matter what generation we're from, and that we can utilize the resources that each person brings to the table as a strength so that we can grow as we move forward. And so that research I thought was just incredible. There's so much more depth to that research that I didn't have time or space to put into the book, but it's worth going back and looking at. And it came out right after COVID started in March of 2020. And so I was just perusing through some material and I found that information. I thought, whoa, this is very, very insightful. And what are we going to do to prevent staying in the comfort zone? That's where we love to exist. And that statement about we don't need to train new leaders. Because if our goal is just to stay in the comfort zone, there's no need to train new leaders. We just need to stay where we're at. And what's going to happen is, this kind of almost sounds morbid, but we're just waiting for our own funeral as an organization, because the organization will die. It cannot continue in the comfort zone and succeed, because the only way to succeed is you have to grow. The only way to grow is you have to change. And if we're not willing to change, then there will be no growth, and ultimately it'll be the death of the organization.
Well put. And I completely understand and agree with what you're saying, and you backed it up with the research. So I'll say this to you, Bob. So you look at this, and in your studies, so there's tangible research in your book, but in your experience in interacting with different organizations, you do a lot of traveling, you do a lot of speaking and consulting and such. And I'll speak for myself, and then I'll ask you the question. I teach at New York University, and I am infinitely impressed with each and every group that I get to teach, and the wisdom that they have, and their willingness to learn and staying engaged and understanding how, their phones and computers and their access to information is part of their journey and not all of their journey. There's a stigma out there that, they're always just here. And yeah, I get all that, but they're also very wide open to wanting to learn and engage with people. And I'm encouraged by the emerging
Yes.
leaders of today. I think young people are awesome. And so I don't know any other word to use, so I'm going to use that one. What is your opinion of that?
To me, that learning posture is the thing that we need to do as adults. As an older generation, we need that learning posture in which we're willing to listen to and learn from those who are coming up. Because I think you're right. I think they want to learn. They want to be involved in leadership. They want to be a part of changing the future and the direction of the future. And the only way that's going to happen is if we learn from each other. And so we, as an older generation, we need to have that learning posture, that humility that says, I don't know it all. There's a lot that I don't know. I have 10 grandchildren, and I'll tell you, what they do with technology baffles me. And I love it when my grandson comes over and he says, have you updated your iPhone yet? I'm like, okay, no, show me here what I need to do. So he loves helping me to do technology. And so I think that learning posture helps bridge that gap, even though I don't always understand why he thinks the way he does or does the things that he does. But it's one of those things that when we cross that barrier of saying, okay, I need to learn from you, that he just blossoms into showing me things that I don't understand and how I can learn from that. And I think that posture is just critical for any leader, and certainly for an older generational leader.
You have led groups, I have led groups, and when you engage with them and you have them being the younger leaders, right, the younger people that are emerging in their careers, I would learn every single time the way they think, they process information. It's a gift. That is a gift to understand each one of the generations. As you said, there are 5 within our workplaces, and to each in the older generations and everyone in between. Everyone has something to give, perspectives and how they're dealing with their
Yeah.
daily lives relative to their profession, relative to their leadership style. All of it, if you process it as being information from which to make decisions, from which to enact change, which gets back to your book. Okay, Bob, you wrote the book. The book is out. People are buying it. It's just a matter of time before, I'm not going to be able to get you on the podcast because you're going to be so big. Let me just ask
Not
you,
true.
and let's synthesize this. What's your number one takeaway from the process of writing this book, either personal or professional? When you sit down and you look at this beautiful cover and you say, that was an accomplishment, what comes to your mind? We need to know that.
The first thing that comes to my mind is it takes a team. You can't do anything on your own. This book, its cover, the information in it is the result of a team of people that came together and that they were so supportive and willing to work with me to produce what it is. And so I am thankful for each of them. And I acknowledge that in the book. So I'm very thankful. Learning to work as a team and um, to the strengths of each individual, I think is just critical. And as a leader, that's probably what's helped me the most personally and professionally, that it takes a team. It takes a village to raise a child. It takes a team to grow an organization, to write a book. It's not one person that's an island to themselves. It takes a group of people working together. And so I'm very thankful for that opportunity.
What is
Okay.
the number one piece of advice that you would have for an emerging leader?
Well, I think it comes back to the thing that we have been talking about all along. I love that from Colin Powell about being people centered. And to be a people centered person means that we're going to have that learning posture, that we're willing to listen and learn from others. And I'll never forget the first time I was going back to school after high school. I was 28 years old, and my wife and I decided to go to seminary. And before I went to class, I had the opportunity to go with one of my instructors on a trip. And I asked him, what is the one piece of advice you would give me to help me as I start this program? And he gave me two words. He said, be teachable. And I thought, that applies to everything in life. If we are just willing to be learners, if we would just listen, to be teachable and let others, there's so much that we can learn from other people if we just listen to them. And so that ability to listen to other people is just such a critical thing. And I think for emerging leaders, that's probably the best piece of advice I could give them that will help them the most, is to be teachable and realize, you know, at 25, I didn't know near what I know now. And yet I feel like I know less now than I did at 25. And so
Yeah.
there's just so much I don't know and I want to learn. And I think that heart, a learning leader, is probably one of the best things that they can be.
And we thank Dr. Bob Turner very much for being on the show. I have two takeaways for you this week. One is a story and one is a quote from Bob. First, for the story, it was about former Arkansas football coach Houston Nutt. The questions that he asked the incoming freshmen, they can be applied to any leadership situation. 1, can I trust you? 2, are you committed? And 3, do you care? Bob and I talked about that at length. And here's a quote from Bob that I will leave you with. Hope you find this useful within your leadership journey. Quote, an organization cannot continue in the comfort zone. The only way to succeed is you have to grow. And the only way to grow is you have to change. For our podcast producer, Paul Salazar, I am Chris Gargano. We will see you next week with another great guest on Keep the Line Moving.
We thank you for listening to Keep the Line Moving. We would love it if you subscribed or left a review. For more podcast episodes, check out our YouTube page. If you'd like to work with the Gargano Leadership Group, check out our website. This has been a GLG production, copyright 2023. For our podcast producer, Paul Salazar, and our marketing coordinator, Savin Narwal. Have a great week, everyone.